Who should consider participating in clinical trials at Relapse, and why should they consider participating?
That's a great question. So, who should really consider participating in clinical research or clinical trials at time of relapse? I would say typically everyone, because hopefully, so I can say that when my patients their myeloma relapses and we're discussing treatment options, I always think about the different options and then try to boil it down to the two, maybe three, or even one if there's clearly a correct answer, so the best possible options. Often a clinical trial is part of that. So there may be situations where there's a standard of care FDA approved option for treating the myeloma, and then we have a study option. And I would hope that everyone would consider studies. It doesn't always mean that a study is the correct answer, but we should always consider them because studies often present an opportunity to get newer therapies, which may not be FDA approved, or they are FDA approved and we're using them in a slightly different way. And in doing that, we of course hope that it's going to be better, so more effective in controlling myeloma and or reduce the risk of side effects. And so, it's an option to get a therapy that's possibly better that would not be available outside of a clinical study. And then the other tremendous benefit to participating in studies is that it allows us and it helps us as myeloma investigators and the field in general to get smarter about myeloma. And what that means is that the smarter that we get, the better we get at treating myeloma, which means that people down the road do better with this. And that when I think about the benefit of clinical trials and cancer in general, and myeloma is no exception to this. The only reason that we have this huge menu of different treatment options today in multiple myeloma in 2023 is that people who have had this before have participated in studies. That's how new medications are explored. That's how new medications get FDA approved. And so the only way we get better at this is if we participate in studies. And so I'd say to sum up that when clinical studies are appropriate for a person, it's a way of us myeloma or we in myeloma investigators to treat a person's myeloma, help the individual person that we're sitting in front of that has it, and then also get smarter and advance the field so that we can help people in the future and get better at this in general and, hopefully someday find the cure for this.
So, I was taught to consider clinical trials first for any patient that I see. So I think it's a discussion we have with every patient, who has relapse disease. And then, it's an informed discussion, and we also have to take into account, patient considerations, logistics, and whether they'll have that, support mechanism to participate in a clinical trial. I think, for patients who participate in clinical trials, they always have extra pairs of eyes looking over their data, so they have more people watching over them. That's a, big advantage. And especially for patients, who have more advanced myeloma where our commercial treatment options are limited, the only way patients can get newer treatments is through clinical trials. But in general, regardless of whether it's a smoldering myeloma patient, newly diagnosed, or a relapse patient, it's important to think about clinical trials and participate in them.
So the short answer is that everybody should consider a clinical trial at relapse. Relapsing multiple myeloma is really what kills patients. Myelomas are sensitive to chemotherapy at the beginning, but then relapse continually or sequentially until you get to the point where there's nothing that is effective against the myeloma. So understanding why people relapse, how do their myelomas become resistant to therapy, and how you can target that is probably going to be an essential point or an essential understanding to really cure myeloma, because it's not the fact that you don't respond to chemotherapy at the beginning, it's that you relapse with persistently more difficult to treat clones. So clinical trials really help us understand and define new therapies to prevent relapse. And for example, we have a clinical trial that we just completed that targeted a particular molecule called CD28 that is actually important for myeloma cells to become resistant to chemotherapy. So you can actually turn off CD28 or block it, and then all of a sudden myelomas that used to be resistant to chemotherapy are now sensitive to it again. So we can actually turn back the clock on myeloma to something that looked like what the myeloma looked like in the beginning. Those are clinical trials. That's where that understanding is going to be. That's where all the breakthroughs are going to come from.